Anjelica Huston was admired as a symbol of strength and elegance. I don't want to be an example to anyone who doesn't know their own mind yet. What lived underneath that image was something else entirely. A father who controlled her with one hand and destroyed her with the other. A career built inside an industry that told her she wasn't beautiful enough or lovable enough to deserve the room she was standing in. A diagnosis that quietly ended her dream of becoming a mother. And one night in 1986, on the biggest night of her career, Oprah Winfrey did something so deliberate and so cold that Anjelica walked out of that party and never spoke about it publicly for nearly 40 years. At 74, she sat down and finally exposed everything she was never supposed to say. The lonely childhood. Long before Anjelica opened up, that bitter encounter with Oprah on Oscar night opened wounds from her childhood that she had spent a lifetime trying to bury. Anjelica had been born in Santa Monica on July 8, 1951 into a home where her father, John Huston, was gone most of the year. Film sets, distant locations and long shoots took priority, and she grew up watching him come and go without much explanation. When she was 7, he took her to one of his film premieres. Assistants crowded him the moment they arrived, pulling him toward the entrance and lining up photographers. He leaned down and told her he would be back in a few minutes and to stay where she was. Something in his eyes made her pause. It felt careless, like he was already thinking about everything except her. She grabbed his hand before he walked away and asked if she would have to wait long. He said no and pulled his hand back without looking at her again. Then he disappeared into the crowd. Minutes passed, then more. She kept standing in the same spot because he had told her not to move. People rushed by without noticing her. The noise of the crowd grew louder and the hallway emptied and refilled several times, but he still didn't return. She waited almost 3 hours before he finally came back. He didn't ask if she was scared or cold. He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply told her it was time to go inside. It honestly felt like a cruel lesson in how little space she was allowed to take. At 11 o'clock, something even more devastating happened. She walked past her father's study and heard him speaking to a producer. She stopped only because she heard her name. He said she was too soft for this business, not with worry or concern, but with a tone that suggested he had already decided she would never be enough. She walked away before the conversation ended, pretending she had not heard anything. But the words stayed with her. That same pattern resurfaced the moment Oprah turned away from her without a word. It reached straight into the part of her life where being overlooked had become a normal experience even when she was only a child. Anjelica Huston spent her childhood moving between her family's estate in Santa Monica and long stretches in Ireland where she lived with her mother Enria Soma when her parents were separated. Ireland should have felt like a refuge, but it didn't. Her mother cared for her deeply but carried her own private struggles, and her father remained mostly absent due to filming around the world. Their instability left wide gaps in Anjelica's life. Staff members became the people who dressed her, fed her, and watched over her more consistently than either parent ever. School provided no escape. In Ireland, she entered a strict boarding school where she quickly became an outsider. She was taller than the other girls, thinner than most, and carried herself with a seriousness that made her an easy target. Girls made comments about her appearance. Teachers treated her as if she were older than she was. Some called her intimidating, a word she didn't even understand at the time. She drifted toward quiet spaces, often sitting alone instead of risking another hostile interaction. Her father visited rarely, but when he did, his presence created more pressure than comfort. He invited directors and actors to dinner whenever he was home, and she sat at the table trying to blend into the background. Once during a dinner with his colleagues, he introduced her as awkward but honest, and the table laughed in a way that made her chest tighten. Another time he compared her unfavorably to actresses he had cast, saying they knew how to hold a room, a skill he claimed she lacked entirely. Praise came only when she stayed silent or behaved exactly the way he expected. Anything more was seen as a burden. Anything less was a flaw. Then came the moment that showed her exactly how much control he intended to keep. Word spread through her school that a new film adaptation of Romeo and Juliet was being cast, and they were searching for their Juliet among the students. It was the first time Anjelica had wanted something for herself without asking anyone's permission. She didn't tell him. She didn't need to. He found out anyway. He didn't pull her aside gently. He came at her hard, voice raised, finger pointed, telling her she had no business auditioning for anything without his approval. If she was going to act, it would be under his direction and no one else's. Full stop. She stood there and took it. No Juliet, no audition, no choice. Just his voice filling the room and her standing perfectly still, waiting for it to end. He hadn't just closed a door. He had made clear that none of the doors in her life were hers to open. They all belonged to him. At 14, the stress of living under this constant pressure began to show. She started smoking because it gave her a moment to breathe without anyone telling her she was too quiet, too tense, or too emotional. By 17, the cracks in her life widened. Late one night, a family friend knocked on her door in the dark. She woke up confused, still half asleep. And the moment she saw the expression on his face, something in her stomach dropped before he even opened his mouth. Her mother, Enrica Soma, was gone. A car crash in France. She was only 39 years old. There was no one else to go. So Anjelica was the one who walked into that hospital, followed a stranger down a corridor, and stood in a cold room identifying her mother's body. She was completely alone at that moment. Her father returned from filming just days later, made arrangements, attended the necessary meetings, and then went straight back to work. No one suggested grief counseling. No one asked what she needed. She learned that pain was something she had to carry alone. During those same years, Oprah Winfrey was growing up in rural Mississippi and facing hardships that left deep marks on her life. She lived in a small house on her grandmother's property with no indoor plumbing, and she started each day by carrying heavy buckets of water from the well before she even ate breakfast. Her grandmother made her read Bible verses out loud every day and corrected her speech until she got every word right. Money was so scarce that Oprah often wore dresses made from potato sacks, and children at school laughed at her for it. She also faced abuse and constant moves between unstable homes. But her grandmother's strict rules gave her a sense of order that she didn't get anywhere else. At school, teachers noticed she had a strong voice when she stood up to speak, and they pushed her to enter local speaking events. By 17, she won the Miss Black Tennessee pageant. The applause she heard that night was different from anything she had known before. It was the first time she felt the world respond to her with pride instead of pity or dismissal. It didn't erase the pain she carried, but it gave her a glimpse of the future she might reach if she kept fighting her way through the life she had survived up to that point. This created a stark contrast. Oprah received affirmation through performance and strength. Anjelica received distance no matter how well she behaved or how hard she tried. These differences shaped how each woman entered adulthood. They both learned how to survive overwhelming pressure. But the lessons were not the same. Oprah learned to command rooms. Anjelica learned to shrink inside them. And that difference would matter later in ways neither of them could have predicted. Exploitation, humiliation, near collapse. Anjelica Huston entered Hollywood in the 1970s with hope she barely voiced, but the industry pushed back hard from the moment she stepped in. Her first major role came in 1970 when she appeared in A Walk with Love and Death. She was young, nervous, and trying to find her footing. I will think about you on your journey. Perhaps I shall say a prayer for your soul. Her debut had already been torn apart by critics, but nothing prepared her for what came next. Then came the audition that stripped whatever was left of her confidence down to the bone. She walked into the room to read For the Last Tycoon, directed by Elia Kazan, one of the most powerful directors in Hollywood history. She had prepared. She was ready. Kazan looked at her, let a silence sit in the room long enough to make her uncomfortable, and then told her plainly that she didn't have the beauty the role required. He said it the way someone states a fact about weather. Then, as if offering her something generous, he pointed her toward a smaller role in the background, a consolation prize wrapped in casual cruelty. She took it. She stood in that room, nodded, and took it. Because what else do you do when a legend looks at your face and tells you it isn't enough? She went home that night and sat in the dark for a long time. Not crying, just sitting, absorbing what it feels like when the world confirms the exact thing your father spent your entire childhood making you believe. Her personal life offered no relief. In the mid-1970s, her relationship with Jack Nicholson began. She loved him deeply, but the relationship came with humiliation she could not avoid. Nicholson's affairs were never quiet. Paparazzi caught him leaving other women's homes, and tabloids printed the photos with headlines that made her stomach twist. Then came Ryan O'Neal. She met him during a stretch when her relationship with Nicholson was fraying at the edges. O'Neal was charming in the way that dangerous people often are. Intense, attentive, and completely convincing. She later described him as living like two people inside one body. One version of him was warm, even tender. The other version turned violent over things so small they made no sense. A conversation that ran too long. A laugh that came at the wrong moment. A glance he decided meant something it didn't. The abuse didn't begin slowly. It arrived almost immediately beneath the surface of his charm. And then one night it broke through completely. They were at a party when she stepped away to speak with someone she knew from a previous film. She wasn't gone long. But when O'Neal found her standing in a small group, laughing at something someone had just said, he snapped. He crossed the room, took her by the arm hard enough to silence the people around them, and pulled her away from the group without a word. The moment they were out of earshot, he hit her open-handed across the face with enough force that her vision blurred and her ears rang. She didn't scream. She ran. She found a bathroom upstairs, pushed the door shut and pressed her back against it, her legs shaking underneath her. He followed. He knocked first, then knocked harder, then began pounding with both fists until the frame splintered and the door swung open. He grabbed her by the shoulders, shoved her against the wall, and screamed into her face about disrespect and humiliation while she stood completely still, afraid that any movement would make it worse. When he finally stopped, he walked out as if nothing had happened. She stayed in that bathroom alone, not crying, not moving, just standing there with the wall cold against her back, trying to understand how she had ended up inside this moment. When it was finally over and she was back in Los Angeles, she didn't call a lawyer or a friend or a therapist. She called her half-sister, Alara, who was 13 years old at the time, a child. And that 13-year-old said the one thing no adult in her life had managed to say, leave. So she did. While Anjelica fought through rejection and violence, Oprah Winfrey was rising fast. Between 1976 and 1984, Oprah moved from a Baltimore news anchor to the host of AM Chicago. Within months, her ratings surged. By 1984, she held the top daytime show in Chicago. Viewers connected with her warmth, her humor, and the way she made every person she interviewed feel seen. She offered comfort through the screen, something critics often said Anjelica lacked. Privately, the comparison affected her. She watched Oprah's interviews late at night, studying the ease in her voice and the trust in her eyes. She admired the emotional strength Oprah showed so naturally. In quiet moments, she wished she possessed even a piece of that confidence. It made her question what she was missing and why Hollywood seemed determined to shut her out.